If you're thinking about finally ending lockdown with the trip of a lifetime to, say for instance, Everest Base Camp, then you've probably considered the hazards of trekking at altitude. Well, stick around because today we're going to take a quick look at what those effects are and what you can do to help reduce them. Hi, my name's Jack and welcome to the Summit Fit YouTube channel. This channel's all about talking about the outdoors, about mountains and adventure travel. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. First off, a quick disclaimer. I am not a doctor. Everything I talk about in this video is based off my personal research and also my experience when trekking at altitude. Before you go on a trip such as a trek to Everest Base Camp, it's really important you seek the advice of a doctor or a qualified medical professional to make sure you're fit and ready to go. Whilst there is a big difference between reaching the summit of Everest and its base camp, Everest Base Camp is still high enough for you to feel the effects. If you're planning a trip to Everest Base Camp, let me know if you've got concerns or what they are in the comments below. Or if you've been, how did you find the altitude or what did you do to help reduce the effects whilst you were on the move? Altitude sickness, otherwise known as acute mountain sickness or AMS, is a disorder that people can experience when at altitude if they're not properly acclimatized. Now this isn't the same as feeling the normal effects of altitude, such as shortness of breath, maybe mild headaches or slight dizziness here and there. Altitude sickness is the extreme version of this and needs to be taken really seriously. So what can trigger altitude sickness? Of course, going to altitude. However, your body will gradually adapt as you move, but if you go too fast, you're not giving your body the chance to produce the red blood cells needed to operate at the higher altitude, and therefore altitude sickness can start becoming a problem. Altitude sickness can also be triggered by dehydration, lack of sleep, even drinking alcohol, so it's really important when you're on a trek that you look after yourself. So what are the symptoms of altitude sickness? If you're showing an ongoing fever, a bit of a dry, continuous cough, then there is always a chance there is fluid on the lungs. This is known as pulmonary edema and it is really serious. Alternatively, symptoms such as a headache that won't go away, especially when you take painkillers, dizziness, clumsiness, nausea, lack of consciousness, numbness, and severe vomiting can indicate swelling of the brain. This is known as cerebral edema, and this again is very serious. Of course, there are lots of things you can do to avoid this. First off, and really one of the best things you can do to avoid altitude sickness, is to move at a slower pace. Your body will adapt to the altitude as you ascend. However, if you do it too quickly, that's where AMS can set in. If it's possible, try to sleep at a lower altitude to that of the one at which you've trekked at during the day. Now that doesn't mean if you set off at 2,000 meters, you've got to sleep below 2,000 meters. What it means is if you set off at 2,000 meters and you trek to 2.5, it's worth maybe trying to sleep at 2,400, for instance. That lower altitude helps the body prepare for the higher altitudes and helps you to acclimate. Try and include acclimatization days in your itinerary. Now, if you're going with a company, most of them are going to include acclimatization days. Acclimatization days are days where you don't move further along the trail, so you stay put for a whole 2 nights. And during that day, often it's best practice to try and hike to a higher altitude, say for instance to a viewpoint, and then drop back down to where you first started. That again, sleeping at a lower altitude, gives the body the opportunity to produce additional red blood cells and prepare you, again, for the higher altitudes ahead. Also, these days tend to include slightly shorter treks, which again gives the body the opportunity to rest up, which is especially important given that most of these treks are particularly physically demanding. Dehydration can seriously hasten the onset of altitude sickness, so make sure you drink plenty of water whilst you're on the move. Now often, when you're on treks such as Everest Base Camp, drinking straight from the tap can often be unsanitary, so it's important to carry some sort of filtering or purification system while you're on the move. Click the card above to check out one of our previous videos on the water well filter bottle, which is both a great way to make sure the water you're drinking is safe and clean, and also cut back on the amount of potentially single-use plastic bottles you might use whilst going along the trek. It's important as well that you prepare well for your trip. Altitude sickness is pretty unpredictable and it can get anyone. However, evidence just generally suggests that it's always best if you're in peak physical condition. So make sure you're getting out into the mountains, you're doing lots of training, lots of walks, you make sure you're feeling fit and healthy, your diet's correct before you set off. Finally, there are also drugs that do help combat the effects of altitude sickness, but it is worth thoroughly researching these before you go and checking with your doctor if it's suitable for you to take them. So this was just a bit of a quick look at what altitude sickness is, what can cause it, and what you can do during your trek to help reduce the chances of it affecting you. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up below and please do hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on any of our upcoming videos. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.